Hello and welcome to the latest Liverpool Echo Blood Red podcast. I'm Matt Addison with Paul Gorst and Joe Rummer both alongside me. All of the Premier League matches this weekend have been postponed after the passing of the Queen, while there are doubts over what happens next weekend too around the funeral. We'll keep you updated, of course, with any developments in all of the usual places as things happen throughout the weekend and into next week. We're going to have a quick word on that very shortly. We're going to be having a chat around that 4-1 defeat to Napoli on Wednesday as well. Plenty to discuss there in terms of what Liverpool need to do next. But as I mentioned, Gorsty, we'll start with the postponement of the matches this weekend. It was kind of no surprise ultimately that something was going to be done. We kind of thought that might be the case yesterday. It has now proven to be the case today. But I suppose a mixed reaction, it would be fair to say, around the kind of decision that the Premier League has come to.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on who you're following on Twitter, really, for what the reaction is, because obviously you tend to set your own agenda, don't you, on your social media, and the one I found was quite a lot of people who were a bit annoyed and frustrated that, I mean, essentially it's, a lot of people pointing to the fact that it's going to impact quite a lot of people economically. There's so many people who work at football games, isn't it? It isn't just the 22 players and the managers involved, it's the catering staff who are quite a lot of the time on kind of freelance, hour contracts. It's freelance journalists who might not necessarily be getting paid because there's no football to cover this weekend. So it's been a decision which is taken out of respect, obviously, for Her Majesty the Queen, which is all fine and good, and there are merits to it. But I just feel it's possibly a little bit short-sighted. What does anyone really gain from there being no football this weekend? They could have had minutes applause or minute silences throughout the games across the entire football calendar, really kind of cemented the meaning that the Queen was for a lot of people, not necessarily in the Merseyside area, I'd like to add, but generally it just seems as though it's a little bit of a short-sighted decision. I mean, it won't necessarily impact too many in terms of, frankly, our desk, but there are, as I say, plenty of other journalists who now are missing out on money during a time when there is a bit of certainly a cost of living crisis and whatever else. So it just seems to be a little bit of a short-sighted decision, I feel. They could have paid the proper respects in the right way across the grounds at 3:00 tomorrow afternoon or whatever it may be. And it just seems all a little bit unnecessary, really. But there we are.
Yeah, it's not just professional sport either, Joe. Grassroots and all of the sports, really, apart from rugby, it seems, from what I've spotted in terms of what's not happening this weekend, seems to sort of almost caught people by surprise, really. You'd think that there would have been a plan in place for this kind of eventuality, and I suppose that was the real surprise for me. There was a Premier League meeting this morning at all. I would have thought that they would have known what was going to happen.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I found it quite peculiar this morning that government guidance at least seemed to be that, carry on. There didn't seem to be any sort of guidance from the government anyway to say football must close down. But yeah, I mean, look, it's difficult, isn't it? To talk about these things. We do live in a bit of an island up here in Merseyside, and I think it's not something a lot of us feel that strongly about. And I don't want to sound insensitive because the Queen meant a lot to a lot of people, but I do find it peculiar that in sport we feel like we have to make these grand gestures of, let's call the whole thing off. I mean, as Gorsty said, that there's a lot more at play than just 22 men on a pitch kicking a ball around. There's a lot of economic factors that go into it. There's a lot of people that work within the industry. There's a lot of disruption. Fans will lose money, the ones that will booked accommodation or, train tickets, whatever it might be. It has wider impact than just, let's just call it all off, guys, and pay our respects. And for me, I don't really understand why you would do that with sport and not other walks of life. We can all still go out to a pub or a club tonight, or you can go to the cinema if you want tomorrow and watch a film for 2 hours, but you can't watch a football match for 90 minutes. People still have to live their lives. They still have to escape. And, I find it all slightly odd. And then when you get further down, I mean, grassroots, I mean, I think, to be honest, I think that's pretty poor because at the end of the day, I know people whose 7, 8, 9-year-old children can't play football. To tomorrow or on Sunday, or can't even train because of this. And I find that bizarre. Why should it impact on a kid's health, mental health, enjoyment? Because they won't really understand this. I think you'd be better off having a minute's silence before a grassroots game to show children what it means, rather than calling the whole thing off. So slightly bizarre, but then, as you say, perhaps that's because there doesn't seem to be a protocol, and it seems to be thrown together a little bit this morning. It seems to have come down to a couple of last-minute meetings rather than having a plan. And look, this weekend might be off, but the way things are going, so could next weekend, and then you're looking at a month without Premier League fixtures in a season which is already ridiculous because of so many reasons. Again, look, this is perhaps going off topic a little bit, which is fair enough, but they laugh, don't they, long and loud at Jurgen Klopp, who complains about fixtures and forcing them in. But look, now you've got a season which is disrupted, and this is the reason why they shouldn't play every single midweek, every single week, because you need to have some wiggle room for things like this that happen. So it's all a bit bizarre. But as I say, I don't want to sound insensitive, because I'm not. And the Queen meant a lot to a lot of people, and it's not fair to just completely be insensitive. But it does seem to have been a strange day thrown together, like you say, Matt. It's something that we thought there would have just been a protocol in place.
One of the things that has surprised me is the fact that there wasn't anything in place, Joe. Like you say, I mean, with honestly the greatest of respect to the Queen, she was a woman who was in her mid-90s. Would there not have been any private conversations amongst the powers that be in the Premier League to suggest a framework for the eventuality of her passing at some stage? Because when it did happen, and it, obviously sadly has come to pass, just kind of reacting ad hoc to that seems very amateurish, really, of such a big body that is the Premier League. So they definitely should have at least had a private conversation about it. Not necessarily strict to the letter guidelines that have been dispatched to every Premier League club. There should have at least been something in place to have kind of come up with something, rather than just we'll decide when it happens. But again, that might come back to the government just essentially holding their hands up and saying, not our problem, you crack on with it, which we perhaps should not be as surprised about.
Yeah, certainly be interesting, as Joe mentioned before, around the fixtures and kind of when all of those things fit in. Lots of elements to this. I'm sure we'll come back to it at some point in some form or another. But let's move on to Napoli next. Gorst, you were obviously over in Italy for the game, and I mean, it wasn't a great performance. It probably wasn't the greatest of trips for you. What did you make of that game?
Where to start with this one? Just ruthlessly exposed, weren't they, Liverpool? They've kind of been maybe getting away with it here and there because the performances haven't been good, but they've been getting a draw here or there, or even pulled one out the fire against Newcastle, didn't he? But everything that is wrong with Liverpool's season all came home to roost against a side who looked like a top-class European team. To be fair to Napoli, a little bit of a new look Napoli. They've lost Koulibaly and Mertens and Sydney, and obviously Hamsik left a couple of years back, and they're kind of four big staples of the Napoli team over much of the last 10 years, and none of them are there now, but they've rebuilt superbly by the looks of things. Absolutely put Liverpool to the sword, didn't he? There was no pressure on the ball whatsoever from the midfield. The high line got exposed as a result of it. Mohamed Salah was so far off the pace it was untrue. Fabinho had one of his worst games since Alexander-Arnold. Defensively was shocking. I mean, just everywhere you look, Joe Gomez, so many individual errors from him before he was brought off. To a man, they were just dreadful, and they were punished for it. And I think it's got to be a little bit of a watershed moment now for this season, because some people were still potentially kind of making the case that it's not actually that bad, and they might have had half a point given that they're not massively out of anything at the top of the Premier League, and even the defeat itself, in the Champions League, there's still, still be able to control Group A if they put a run together. But it was more the performance, really, because you wouldn't have been shocked if Napoli would have went in at half-time 5 or 6-0 up. They obviously missed a penalty, or Addison saved it rather, and then Van Dijk had one off the line. They hit the post 40 seconds into the game. So it's got to act now as something. There's a bit of a kick up the backside and a bit of a wake-up call. And we won't know, will we, until Ajax on Tuesday because of the game that's being called off, which in a perverse way might even help Liverpool just get back on the training ground and work on 2 or 3 or maybe even 5 or 6 things that they need to, and go from there. It's just a really horrendous night. One of the worst performances in the Champions League under Klopp. The one that always sticks out for me is Red Star Belgrade in, I think, November of 2018. But this was something else entirely. It really was that bad.
Yeah, the Napoli fans, Joe, were obviously really happy with the performance and the result. The Italian media, really enjoyed it as well. I think in terms of kind of how much Liverpool had been hammered by Napoli, but how much did they impress you, or how much do you think was it a case of Liverpool were just so bad that you can't really read too much into that? It was more just a case of Liverpool were abysmal.
No, I think Napoli deserve credit. At the end of the day, they set out to expose Liverpool in certain ways. The forward, Simhe. Sorry, it's awful. I'm sorry if he's listening. I butchered your name, but he, before he went off injured, he ran the channels well. I thought he dragged Joe Gomez pretty much here, there, and everywhere, didn't he? And there was clearly a focus from Napoli to expose Liverpool's high line, and they did that really, really well. So Napoli deserve tremendous credit. They've obviously started the season very well, and it showed. But I mean, first of all, some perspective. Klopp teams, we've seen it happen before. It'll happen again when Liverpool do get exposed because of the risky nature of their football. I think it can look particularly bad, and it can make players look. I think Van Dijk looked out sore the other night, as did Gomez. But because of the way they're brave, aren't they? They play such a high line. They leave players isolated one-on-one. It can look bad, and it can go from bad to worse quite quickly. But so, the result in isolation, I think you can sort of move on from. It's not the end of the world. In the Champions League, as I think, I think the group stage of the competition personally has gone a bit stale, because I don't think there's any jeopardy there anymore. I think no one really worries really about the away games, because I think by and large you win your home games, you get through the group. So Liverpool will still be, confident. If I was a betting man, I'd bet on Liverpool to win the group. But if you take the game out of isolation and look at it in the context of this season, I think it's really worrying. And, it's accumulation of the issues that Liverpool have had all season. And, a team in Napoli who were very well prepared, who came out and totally exposed them. And look, as Doyle gleefully put in our blood red group the other day, that someone said that I was perhaps moaning too much the other day, and I'm conscious that personally I've moaned a lot this season. I'm kind of, for a guy who I like to think that I'm usually quite glass half full. I feel like it's been quite frustrating, but I just think the rot all starts from midfield, and I'm so frustrated with it, because I look at that midfield and think successful Klopp team when they've been at their best. To me, the midfield has been like the unsung hero. It's been the 3 workers who make everything happen for everyone else, allow the fullbacks to attack, allow the forwards to be free. And I look at it now and think there's no balance there, that there's no consistency in the 3, that they change every week. Unfortunately, I think, if I'm being brutally honest, I think Milner's too old to play every game. Harvey Elliott's too young to play every game. Fabinho is the type of player that does look isolated when the balance isn't right around him. And, Klopp said it himself. I think, let's be brutally honest, Klopp said himself after the game, they play the high line. There's nothing wrong with the high line when the midfield puts pressure on the ball, and that isn't happening. And it's clear that isn't happening. And it's not happening in a cohesive way. So, to me, it all starts with the midfield. And that is I'm sorry, but it's a failure of the club to prepare for a midfield that is aged and that is suffering injury problems. And whether it's the board, in terms of the owners, whether it's the transfer department, whether it's a slight bit of stubbornness from Klopp, it's combined. And I think there is a lot to be played for this season, and of course they can get players back, and we know more than anyone that Klopp can get that team playing. It could happen in the next game. It could all click and they could go on a 10-game winning run and make me and others look stupid. But I don't think we can hide from the fact that midfield needed freshening up in the summer. I'd argue it needed freshening up the summer before, and it certainly needs freshening up next summer. And it will only become a bigger and bigger problem if they don't do that.
Well, just want to make the point, Matt, before you ask the next question. Joe mentioned there about Harvey Elliott, and I made the point for Elliott the other week on the pod saying, people say, oh, he's going to be a player, and the only way you can kind of fulfill that is by playing. And I almost feel like I'm doing a U-turn on him at the moment, because it just looks like he's a little bit rabbit in the headlights at the moment. Not on the ball, because he's a quality young player, isn't he? But out of possession, he hasn't got the same kind of pressing instincts or physicality, really, to get about the pitch and put opposition under pressure when they're on the ball. So when the team is struggling, it becomes difficult to kind of carry him to an extent, because like if you look at Liverpool last season, and he was starting games in midfield, and he was looking like he was going to be a really exciting player, and he will be, of course. But that was when everyone was at 100%. Everyone was playing really to a high level, and they were just kind of looking to evolve slightly by dropping him in there and giving him a little bit of a run out and getting some minutes under his belt and watching him develop, and developing around the rest of the team that was world-class quality. And Joe Gomez, to an extent, this season is a little bit similar. If he's playing centre-back at a time when everyone else is fit and firing and Liverpool are at those levels, that's how he kind of gets his rhythm back to the level he was at, 2 years ago before that horrendous injury. But when they're not, and Liverpool collectively have dipped so badly, it becomes a lot more difficult for these players to perform, I think, and that's what we're seeing at the moment. Klopp did mention that there was no kind of pressing in midfield or pressure on the ball, and it was only when we seen Thiago come on that there was any kind of closing down and getting near Napoli and putting a tackle in, and that was the biggest problem for me on Wednesday, because it just leaves the back four exposed when they're trying to squeeze the pitch and move high up the pitch, because simple ball in behind and Napoli are in, and Sunday league teams can play like that, can't they? It was obvious from the first minute when Oscar goes in and goes around Addison. So I just feel, there aren't too many other options at the moment because of the injuries, but I just feel like it might be a little bit of a chance just to take Elliott out the final line for a bit and get a little bit of solidity and just a bit of physicality in midfield if they can from somewhere, and then slowly just kind of build back up, slowly but surely, because it's certainly not working at the moment.
Sorry, Matt, let you get a word in now, but just to carry on that point, I couldn't agree more. And I feel sorry for Elliott, because I don't think at his age we should be having these conversations about him. He should be playing in he should be playing in the Bournemouths at home, and he should be getting those minutes, building up his confidence. And Liverpool are in a bit of a catch-22 situation with him this season, I think, because he is one of their brightest young players. He's playing with more confidence than perhaps many of the others in the team. But I'd still argue that in an ideal world, you don't want him playing every week, because it just isn't right for his development. They should be able to pick and choose the games that he comes in. Napoli away, Old Trafford away. These aren't the sorts of games that I think suit him. And as well, you think back to when Liverpool were really on song, and a guy, not that I've been hung up on this one piece of criticism all week, but I have. But the guy who criticised me for saying that the midfield lacked balance. Well, the whole point is that, I do think Harvey Elliott slows things down by cutting in on his left foot. I think, this guy said, oh, well, does it remind you of anyone? Yeah, Mo Salah does it. But Mo Salah's a forward. He plays in the final third, and he can do that. And also, you don't want two players cutting in on their left foot on the right-hand side, because there's no cohesion between them. And if you think back to when Liverpool were at their very best, with someone like, that had the midfield of Wijnaldum on the left side, Fabinho and Henderson. Henderson would also fill in at right back for Trent, so Trent's more exposed because Elliott's not dropping into those areas. And that's not a criticism of Elliott as a player, it's a criticism of the system. And Liverpool have played a system that suits the personnel. Right now, it clearly doesn't, and there's something going wrong, and that is churning the results and the performances. So, I really don't like having these conversations about Harvey Elliott because, don't get me wrong, I think he's got a massive future at Liverpool. He's really, really talented. But I don't think he quite works in this system because of you seeing it break down. When you play Bournemouth at home, it'll look fine. But when you're playing in these trickier games, it breaks down. So, it's slightly difficult to talk about, but there you go.
In terms of kind of the overplaying of certain players, I think James Milner almost fits into that category as well. Of kind of there is a role, Gorsty, for him within this Liverpool team, but it just isn't 3 times a week, 90 minutes running himself into the ground. I mean, I could kind of see the argument really on Wednesday night for kind of there's no Jordan Henderson, so you want that kind of experience in the middle of the pitch, but then at the same time, about 20 minutes into the game, he'd given away a penalty, clattered into someone with a stupid tackle and got a yellow card and just didn't really get anywhere close to it. So probably the biggest thing that he was there for was the experience, but it just didn't quite pan out in that way.
No, it didn't at all. And we do a piece of content, don't we, on our site where we kind of pick our teams for the game. And I put Milner in there and made the point of him being in there as a kind of experienced old head to add a bit of solidity. And then 20 minutes in, I'm tearing my hair out thinking, well, that's why I'll never make it as a manager. I mean, I made the point in the post-match verdict that Milner just looks like what he is at the moment, a player whose debut came 20 years ago. And here he is starting games for Liverpool in the Champions League when they were finalists 3-4 months ago. So, yeah, there is a place for Milner in the squad. It's coming on for 20 minutes here and there and seeing out a game and maybe giving others a little bit of a breather now and then, but it's not starting games in the Champions League away from home. Certainly not at a team as good as Napoli. But again, I suppose that comes back to the unrelenting injury crisis in midfield that just doesn't seem to ever end or ever subside. I asked Klopp about Curtis Jones on Tuesday because he hadn't travelled, and he was on the bench for Newcastle, wasn't he? But then he wasn't for what was the game after that? I can't remember. The derby, wasn't it? And he said that he suffered a reoccurrence of this stress reaction in his calf, and he was out for 6 weeks for that one, wasn't he? Roundabout. Picked it up in the Community Shield, and he only came back for the Newcastle game, so a month, say. So if he suffered a reoccurrence of that could be another 2-3 weeks of him on the shelf. Carvalho I'd put in the same category as Elliott at the moment. You wouldn't want him playing too many games, and I think there's already been a little bit of an over-reliance on him, throwing him on, expecting them to retrieve games. And okay, he did it at Newcastle, but he shouldn't be being asked of him, this early into his Liverpool career. So there are a lot of issues. I think Arthur Miller will take a while to get adjusted. There's one kind of slither of good news, it's that Thiago is now back. Just need him to stay fit, and he's not a kind of fix-all player, but having him back will at least give Liverpool something quality in midfield and a player who's been there and done it, and hopefully he can get a bit of run in the team. But we shall see, because he's never been the most durable, has he, sadly. Naby Keita, can we talk about him for a minute? Because he's been called up to Guinea despite having not played a single minute for Liverpool this season. Not sure what's going on there. Someone was telling me yesterday that they don't expect him to play for Guinea, but what is the point of calling him up, sending him across to another continent while he's injured? Something a bit strange going on there. Had up to hear from Jurgen Klopp on that today, but obviously the Wolves press conference was cancelled, so we're still none the wiser. Maybe something he'll update us with on Monday before the Ajax game. That's a very strange situation. So everywhere you look, there are problems, and it's well, it's down to us to have a little bit of a moan about it on these pods. It's down to Jurgen Klopp to put it right as soon as he can.
How much of a positive is Thiago, Joe, in terms of him coming back? I think he did make Liverpool look a lot better on Wednesday night, but I wonder whether part of that was that Napoli had already won the game at that point. It was probably an easier time to come into it than anything else, but I suppose he will make some sort of positive difference for Liverpool.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of Thiago, you think of that classy player, don't you, that gets on the ball, that sprays passes around and moves the ball forward quickly. But, you know, what I found about him the other night, he almost came on and played the way we sort of expected, say, a Milner to play, and he came on, he intercepted things, he was up in their face and like playing with quite a lot of aggression. I was slightly concerned, thinking, you know, this one's gone, mate. You know, like don't injure yourself trying to drag Liverpool back into this one. But yeah, I mean, he certainly had a positive impact. And, you know, again, you know, I keep talking about balance, but I certainly think when he plays, he gives Liverpool far more balance. You know, he sort of settles things down in midfield. He's very experienced. And, you know, I think crucially as well, one thing that we've seen this season a lot is that I don't think Liverpool have got the ball forwards to their forwards quick enough. You know, I think quite often it seems to be slower getting the ball forward into the final third, and then you see moves break down. They're never exploiting space in behind teams or getting players into positions where they can threaten. And with Thiago, you expect that to happen because he's so good at spotting those straightforward passes with a lot of pace. So that, I think, is really key for Liverpool. They've not had that since the opening day of the season. And it's easy to sort of disregard that, isn't it? You know, that they've not had one of their key players. So it's massive to have him back. But again, like Gorst says, I just can't get excited about it because I'm just so concerned now that he'll come back and he'll be gone again in 2 weeks. And this is the issue that Mr. Negative in me keeps coming out, because I think, well, why didn't they prepare for this? You know, where was the conversations? You know, 2 years ago, that, you know, Liverpool always want people to know that they plan in advance, two windows in advance. And, you know, it's a very good, nice bit of PR, but at the end of the day, it doesn't look very good when this is where we are and they're meant to plan so far in advance. So if they did want Tuchemi this summer, then surely there should have been alternatives, or could have been alternatives, rather than limp through another year. So I'm glad to see Thiago back, and I think Liverpool will improve no end if he can get a run of games, but it's still a big if at this stage.
One of the other things that I wanted to mention, Gorsty, was I think Jurgen Klopp, I can't remember whether it was in his press conference or for BT afterwards on Wednesday, I think he used the word reinvention. I think I'm right in saying that, and kind of spoke a little bit around that, which, I don't know, that didn't quite feel right at this point in the season as well. I don't know whether maybe I misread the context of those quotes, but to kind of be talking in that sense, 7 games into the season are we? That seemed a little bit strange to me.
Yeah, well, to be fair, I think he said that to BT Sport, and then Simon Peach from the Press Association actually asked him in the post-match press conference, you know, what exactly did you mean by that? And to be fair to Klopp, he said, well, you know, sometimes you just say things after games and you haven't had a chance to properly analyse things, and maybe we don't need to reinvent ourselves, but we need to be playing, you know, if we were playing at a similar level as last season, I think everyone would be happy with that. So it was almost just a kind of case of, let's just get back to where we were a few months ago and then reassess and see what we can do about adding 1 or 2 things to the game. Because for all the kind of talk of integrating Darwin Núñez and, you know, the little bit of a new plan for Trent, for example, or even Robertson, for me, when he played against Palace, I noticed he was kind of breaking beyond the striker at certain points, and it looked to me like it had been like a little bit of a new tactic that Liverpool were trying to unleash. All of that is kind of being brushed to the side while they try and bring back elements of the game that they've been so consistent with for so long, because all of it's just gone to the wall, hasn't it, of late? There's no pressing, there's no harrying hand and closing down, getting tight, putting in the foot. They're kind of just letting the opposition do what they want, and then in possession that they look so off the pace as well. So I think there are a lot of things they need to do just to get back to where they were before they can start thinking of developing the game further with the unpredictability that they often talk about. So I think that was just something Klopp initially said BT Sport, because we know that he loves the kind of the one-liners, doesn't he? The kind of sound bites, and I think he said something like we need to reinvent ourselves, and you kind of look at it and think, oh well, that's a bit of a statement. But then I think perhaps he was given another 10 minutes to think about it while he came into the press conference, and I think he just meant get back to the way that we were, and then we can take it from there, because so much of what makes Liverpool a great side just isn't there at the moment.
Just to finish up then, Joe, in terms of kind of getting back to what Liverpool want to be, obviously Thiago will play a part in that. Diogo Jota back as well, he could play a bit of a part in it. There's still plenty to get out of Darwin Núñez. What's the kind of priority, do you think, in terms of just getting something more like the normal Liverpool back? Is there one or two things that you think would be an obvious fix, or is there just too many to name at this moment?
There's a lot to name, isn't there? I mean, first of all, I would be looking for consistency. Gorst, I think, has written a piece that will be going up soon about Joel Matip. And I agree that I think I would look to try and get some consistency into areas of the pitch, like the back four, for example. Let's get a partnership between Van Dijk and Matip and stick with it if that's the way we're going. I should imagine they probably wanted to go with Konate this season more regularly, but his injury has sort of put paid to that. So, I would start there, try to get some sort of consistency into midfield. Fabinho, Thiago, and one other, whether that is Elliott in some games, and then, you rotate in others. But certainly, I'd like to see two of the three filled more regularly. And then your forward line, you've got more options, haven't you? So yeah, I mean, that's starting to look healthier now. It'd be great if we could see Jota getting back on the score sheet. I'm not massively concerned, but some slightly worrying statistics around Jota and his goal scoring record this calendar year. Obviously he had a good season last season, but the goals dried up a little bit towards the end. But then, so as they did for Salah, I don't think really towards the end of last season it was only really Sadio Mane that was regularly scoring. So, I think that statistic is worrying, but it's slightly within context of what Liverpool have been doing in the last sort of 6 months. So, I've no doubt that once Liverpool click, he will get scoring again. So, I mean, there's that. Personally, I wonder whether, when Klopp thought about reinventing him, Liverpool, yeah, maybe it's not quite the word he was looking for, but I'd love to know whether there's some internal discussions about a tweak of formation in the longer term, and whether that, because you look at the personnel they have now and the way perhaps a Núñez plays, trying to get the best out of an Elliott or a Cavallo, and looking for a more regular two in midfield rather than three. You wonder whether that could work with a 4-2-3-1, that sort of thing. But maybe does that make the fullbacks less effective? I suppose these are the questions that Klopp will be trying to answer in training. So I wondered when he said reinvention, whether it could be something more drastic like that. But yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is to just get consistency in certain areas, central defence, central midfield, and obviously the forward line hasn't been quite as bad, but now they have options. But yeah, I'd start there.
Yeah, certainly plenty of things for Liverpool to be working on this weekend, but no game. So we'll leave it there for today's podcast. We'll have all the usual stuff next week as well around the Champions League, providing that goes ahead. But for now, that will just about do us. From myself, Matt Addison, Joe Rimmer and Paul Gorst, it's goodbye for now.